There she is. Lego City.
Brings you back here, Chase McCain?
An old acquaintance. A promise to keep. A debt of honor to be repaid.
I meant business or pleasure. I have to fill in your paperwork, and with the skill of an old sea dog, I slide her smoothly into port. And what brings you to Lego City, young lady?
This boat?
Oh, fiddlepants!
Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and tonight I'm going to be reviewing to you Lego City Undercover for the Nintendo Switch, which is actually a single-screen re-release of a Wii U exclusive that came out in 2013, but because it was on the Wii U, it didn't get nearly the audience it deserved, even though it was published by Nintendo of all people. Yet, I guess even they couldn't have made it so that some people are just going to say, oh, it's another Lego game. And while that's certainly true with parts of the game, looking at it as a whole, this is a very fresh and incredible experience that, while it may not be on the scale of epic and grand like most open world games, it's definitely a step in the right direction for the Lego franchise. And one that I think you should hear me out on it before you just immediately dismiss it as yet another Lego game. We don't want to fall into that yet another Call of Duty trap, after all. So, first off, for those of you that haven't played a standard Lego game based on a licensed franchise before, let me give you the rundown. You basically swap between different characters. In the case of Chase, because he's one cop, you switch between different costumes to change his abilities depending on the situation. You might need to be dressed up as a cop in order to follow footsteps, or you might need to be a robber to pry open gates with your crowbar. And you'll switch between them with the tap of Z and R, which makes it easy to make sure that you always have the right ability on hand without having to go through a long ordeal of going through a menu or anything like that. Lego games also have a habit of having a good mixture of action versus cinematics, which often have this overly literal, childish type of humor that is really endearing. And what might scare people off right away is that the original Lego games, back from starting with Lego Star Wars on the GameCube, were pantomimed because I guess they couldn't get the license for the actors to act out the scenes. However, since this is a totally new intellectual property that is not based on any individual franchise, they had to have full voice acting, and boy is it done really well. It actually kind of shocked me how well it was done, because I was thinking, a lot of Wii U games have sort of this ho-hum, like they could have been great, but they seem to have fallen under this era of Nintendo laziness. Thankfully, that is not the case here, as the production values are top-notch. Heck, even the graphics have a level of polish to them, with the way that the light reflects off of the characters because they're made out of Legos, to the surprisingly realistic texture work, combined with the cartoony effect of the Lego objects that you can interact with. It all blends together really nicely to create a child-friendly, yet humorous, yet still fairly intense theme, because you're an undercover cop. So it can't be too lighthearted, but it can't be too adult either, because it's a Lego game and they want to make everything lighthearted. The combination works really well, and the more you progress through the game, the more Chase gets some really amazing abilities, like being able to run up rooftops really quickly or do wall jumps. As the game progresses, you get more and more action pieces that really make you feel like you're inside a movie, especially with some opportunities where the music becomes sort of this big band, James Bond style of soundtrack. Again, everything had to be composed from scratch, though I think they might have copied a bit of Beethoven's music for one of the scenes. Who knows? The point is, for being a totally original LEGO game, this is a really cool concept, and I'm really excited to revisit this world in LEGO City Undercover: The Chase Begins for the 3DS, which is actually a prequel to this game. So, newcomers to LEGO City Undercover might find a few of the references going over their head, but thankfully, even if you haven't played the 3DS prequel, there are still some surprisingly good story moments, and the game explains itself well enough so that by the time you're past the second or third chapter, you know the gist of what's going on. You gotta stop Rex Fury again, because he's causing havoc in LEGO City. And in order to do that, Chase can't outright reveal that he's a cop, so he has to go undercover, and that's where the costumes come in. Now, in case you've already played the Wii U version before, you might be wondering what is there to come back to if you've already played that to death. Well, one of the biggest additions is the addition of a co-op mode, which, strangely enough, when the original Wii U version came out, it was one of the few LEGO platformers that didn't have a co-op version, because that was basically what defined LEGO games, was being able to play it with a friend. Now, I haven't actually had a chance to try out the co-op mode yet. For one, I was renting this, and for two, my sister isn't always as reliable as she used to be when it comes to playing video games with me. But I have heard that instead of being restricted to being near each other, each player gets their own side of the screen and they can wander wherever they want. It's a humongous city, so that's a really impressive technical feat to be able to do that. And I reckon that would be really handy in the more story-based missions, which are called special assignments this time, when you're in a more linear, confined setting and you need to fulfill a specific objective in order to return to the more open-ended, wander around as you please LEGO City. There are a lot of things that you can do while you're in LEGO City, the most prominent of which involve being able to drive a car, a boat, a plane, you name it. There are a lot of transportation objects, and not only are they mandatory with several incredible chase scenes, but they're even a lot of fun and convenient. Driving a car, while the controls are admittedly pretty awful, it does make it a lot easier to traverse the city, because this place is humongous. You would think, okay, it's a LEGO game, they're going to play it safe. Nope! They went to the trouble of creating a city that's on par with the likes of, say, a normal Grand Theft Auto game, or even one of the 3D Zeldas. The city really does feel large, sprawling, and believable, because not only do you have constant snippets of voice acting of the citizens going about their daily business, but you've also got the sounds that you would expect from a city, along with plenty of different variety of locales. While this may be a city, you'll run into sewers, farmlands, forests, and the like, because, as with any city, there are urban and rural types of environments. So as a result, you should never get bored of exploring. And the game has a ton of content to peruse. You can find several characters, vehicles, super builds, which require you to collect the square studs instead of just the circular ones this time, to build new objects and whatnot. Overall, the game does a good job of mixing up action with cutscenes. Although that's easier said than done when you're splicing up video game footage, because part of me wants you guys to really appreciate the amazing humor this game has, especially since this is fully voiced. So as a result, the voice actors, while they may sound cheesy if you look at it out of context, when you look at the game in the big picture, you realize that the voice acting really helps extra emphasize the LEGO humor and make the original pantomimed cutscenes from the days of old as funny as they would have been had this been based on an actual license. And now that I have experienced how amazing the voice acting can be in this original setting, I kind of hope that all LEGO games follow this kind of formula from now on. Now, where LEGO City stumbles a little bit is when it tries to fall too hard into the cliches of the times of old. For instance, the floaty physics are still here that can occasionally make tough platforming a little bit tougher than usual, but because of the addition of blue and white objects, that enables Chase to have context-sensitive abilities, which make certain sections considerably easier than they would otherwise have been with this style of platforming. For instance, Chase might be able to wall jump, or he might be able to run along a rooftop. And since everything that's interactable is blue and white, you know, okay, this is an area where I can walk across a rope. And the game will sometimes make automatic adjustments so that you don't misalign your jump. Now, while this is easier said than done, as the camera is occasionally still frustrating and will get stuck in place a lot, it certainly alleviates a lot of the problems. Combat also has been vastly improved. Most LEGO games' combat is pretty darn simple, either button mashing or just hitting the enemy a bunch of times fairly strategically. Thankfully, the combat has evolved a fair bit since you're a cop. While at first you can really only do just punches and body slamming the criminals, eventually you'll get into full-on fight scenes where you can parry, dodge, and even grab an enemy and hurl it into another. These combat sequences are a lot of fun, and while they're not overly challenging, as you still can't really die, you sort of just respawn instantly if you run out of hearts, just with less studs. Although, that's really less of a problem than it normally is, because studs are pretty much everywhere in this game. And because this is a gigantic city, your studs are usually going to be in the thousands, with no chance anytime soon of running out. All they really do is unlock stuff. It's the big square bricks that you want to get for story purposes. The game incentivizes you to want to explore the city by occasionally having what's called super builds, which allow you to construct, say, a car or a shuttle or something that you need to progress through the storyline. And so as a result, you'll need to collect giant bricks that'll make your square bricks go up a lot faster than just simply smashing objects, as was the case of LEGO games in the past, of which there is still plenty of that here. But if you want to just keep smashing objects for hours on end, especially when you only have 17,000 blocks and you need 50,000, you're going to want to get those super builds. And so as a result, you get a scanner that makes it easier to search for those bricks. And then therefore you don't have the pain of wandering around saying, oh no, where do I have to go? What do I have to do? There's always an indicator on your map that tells you how close or how far away you are. And therefore, as a result, if you want to progress the main storyline, you can, no problem. But if you want to progress to a side quest, you can also set that on your map, so that there will be an indicator saying, okay, this is where the nearest brick is, or this is where the nearest super build is, because there are some optional ones here and there. Again, there are a ton of things to collect in this game, and 100% completion is going to significantly lengthen your game time. Although the main storyline is still surprisingly meaty, this should take you roughly between 15 to 20 hours if you're just going for the main story alone without trying to collect everything. I don't even want to know how long it would take to 100% complete everything, because there are a lot of things to do. There are, just to name characters alone, there are over 300 to collect, and while most of their abilities boil down to standard, this is a criminal, this is a robber, with their own forgettable set of abilities, it is nice that you have a lot of variety and a lot of options here. There are always green studs in the city that make it easy to know while you're driving which way to go, and some vehicles even allow you to have a speed boost. Driving is arguably the weakest part of this experience, unfortunately, because the driving controls are so out of whack. And again, it's kind of a LEGO tradition, you're kind of used to it, but in a game that actually gives you mandatory driving missions, and where some of the story points are so far apart that if you don't use a vehicle, it's going to take you a really long time to get from one place to another, I wish they could have maybe incorporated a first-person view, or maybe Mario Kart-style improvements, sorry. As it is, you usually have to be overly careful if you want to even remotely get a semblance of good driving skills. If you are the type that wants to be super duper moral and doesn't want to do anything wrong, then this game is going to be a dreadful learning curve for you. You're going to have to be willing to run over poles to get more studs or watch the people scream in terror as they try to get away from your reckless driving. As the game goes along, Chase will poke fun of his own bad driving to sort of make you feel better. But that doesn't excuse you when you're doing, say, a time trial where you have to get through a driving segment as quickly as possible. And you want to use precision, but you can't because of the way the game's controls are. Thankfully, the rest of the game controls, for the most part, okay. The camera controls take some getting used to because they're not nearly as smooth as what you might expect in, say, Breath of the Wild or Super Mario Odyssey. But they get the job done when you're in the open. The camera does feel a bit overly restrictive when you're on special assignments. The music is also surprisingly good too. While it's a little bit more forgettable than the average LEGO soundtrack because this is a totally new property, so they had to compose all the music from scratch, most of it boils down to a James Bond-style chase sequence type of music, with some occasional brilliance stuck in there, like some chorus pieces near the end when you're at the final sequence, a Beethoven-type piece when you're in a museum, and even some banjo music themes when you're in the farm area. Overall, the game is a blast to listen to with stellar voice acting, incredible environmental sounds, and a giant open-world city that's going to keep you busy for hours on end, if not years on end, if you try to get everything. The map is surprisingly easy to make out, but on the other hand, the game also handholds you a lot, which is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it's really easy to know what you're doing, even to the fact where they blatantly tell you, here's how to beat the final boss. But on the other hand, there are some things that the game doesn't tell you that it expects you to know. For instance, I did not know that you could collect large bricks to increase your square brick counter for when you're doing super builds at first. Something that I wish the game would have been more clear on. Maybe if I had looked more closely at the flashing icons, that could have been avoided, as I'm not usually the type of person that's good at figuring stuff out on my own. Nevertheless, these are minor gripes in a really good game that should be a my first LEGO game, or the LEGO game that restores your faith in this style of Telltale Games franchise. It's a wonderful formula on an ever-stale franchise that really deserves a second chance, and LEGO City Undercover is a great way to do that. The game supports co-op mode, but is still a blast to play alone, as Chase being the sole protagonist means that even if you're only one player, you're still going to get an enjoyable experience, as there's more than enough to uncover, explore, enjoy, and of course you'll get plenty of laughs from the humor. This is definitely the kind of game that, if you're skeptical, you'll probably want to rent it first, but then I would say it's worth a buy. And since the game was not released at full price when it first came out, I would say you don't necessarily have to wait for a sale. I would say $30 is more than an ideal amount of money to pay for this absolutely stellar experience that, again, was originally a Wii U exclusive, originally published by Nintendo, so occasionally it has that Nintendo magic that makes this game a standalone treat. With that, if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section, and until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and stay on the right side of the law. Bye!